Batman has always stood apart from other heroes. He doesn't have superpowers or alien origins, and he isn't the product of a scientific experiment. What defines him is the pain he carries from childhood. The murder of Bruce Wayne's parents in a dark alley is one of the most familiar scenes in comic book history, but it is more than just an origin story. It explains why Batman fights the way he does, why he cannot stop, and why he continues to return night after night to face crime in Gotham. Psychologists describe trauma as an event that reshapes the way someone sees the world. For Bruce, that moment was a rupture that never closed. Instead of healing, he chose to build his entire life around it. Rather than moving on, he made the memory of that loss the center of his identity. Batman is not just a disguise or a mission. It is the form his pain has taken, turned outward into a lifelong pursuit of control in a city that once left him powerless. This is what often defines vigilantes. They are rarely guided only by duty or optimism. More often, their drive grows from wounds they cannot put to rest. For Batman, that wound becomes both his strength and his burden. He is effective because he never lets go, but it also means he is trapped in a cycle that gives him no peace. In this video, we'll be tracing how Bruce Wayne's tragedy set this path in motion, how he transformed grief into a purpose, and why he cannot allow himself to heal. We'll also examine the psychological toll of carrying such a burden, how his story compares to other vigilantes, and what it reveals about our fascination with these figures in fiction and culture. Before we begin, consider subscribing if you want more explorations into the hidden psychology of heroes, villains, and the worlds they shape. Now let's start with the night that altered Bruce Wayne's life forever. Every story of Batman begins with the same moment. A boy walking out of a theater with his parents, a robbery gone wrong, and the sound of gunfire in the night. That scene has been retold countless times because it explains everything that follows. For Bruce Wayne, the loss of his parents was not just the death of family. It was the collapse of security, the sudden understanding that the world could be cruel, random, and unfair. Psychologists describe events like this as formative trauma. They do not fade with time. Instead, they shape the way a person understands their place in the world. Bruce was 8 years old when it happened. At that age, children are still forming their sense of safety and trust. For most, parents represent stability. When that foundation is ripped away in a violent moment, the effect is overwhelming. Bruce witnessed the brutality firsthand, and it left him with a question he would never stop asking. Why did this happen, and how could it be prevented? That single night etched itself into his memory so deeply that it became the center of his identity. What makes Batman's psychology unique is that he never allowed himself to move beyond the trauma. In many cases, survivors eventually learn to process grief, even if the pain never disappears entirely. Bruce, however, refused closure. He carried the memory like a vow. He chose to keep the wound open, almost as if letting it heal would be a betrayal to his parents. This refusal to let go is not unusual in people who experience profound loss at a young age. Survivors often hold on to guilt or responsibility, replaying events in their minds, convinced that something could have been done differently. For Bruce, that guilt became his driving force. The night in Crime Alley also marked the beginning of a lifelong fear. He learned that violence can arrive suddenly, without warning. But instead of allowing fear to dominate him, he sought to master it. Batman is, in many ways, the armor Bruce built to contain his fear and project strength back into the world. The cape and cowl are not simply costumes. They are the form of a child's terror turned into power. This is the psychology of a vigilante. Unlike a soldier or police officer who can step into and out of duty, the vigilante makes justice their entire existence. The mission is not a job. It is survival. Bruce Wayne's life ended in that alley, and the figure of Batman rose in its place. Every criminal he confronts, every night he spends on the streets, is a replay of that moment. He cannot bring back his parents, but he can wage war on the thing that took them from him. The night that broke Bruce Wayne created more than grief. It created a cycle of obsession, one that would define him for the rest of his life. After the night in Crime Alley, Bruce Wayne faced a choice that most children never confront. He could have lived with his grief, grown into adulthood, and tried to build a normal life. Many people in Gotham expected that path. Instead, Bruce decided that his pain would not fade into the background. He transformed it into the mission of Batman. That decision is the heart of what separates him from others who experience tragedy. Psychologists often describe this process as meaning-making. People who endure traumatic loss search for ways to give that loss purpose. Some turn to family, faith, or service. Bruce turned to justice. He could not accept that his parents died for nothing, so he reshaped his future around the vow that no one else should suffer the same fate. This vow was not a passing promise made by a grieving child. It became the foundation of his identity. From that moment, Bruce was not simply living for himself. He was living as the keeper of a cause. To fulfill this vow, Bruce embarked on a transformation that demanded more than money or determination. He trained his body to the limits of endurance and sharpened his mind across the world, studying everything from criminology to martial arts. Each skill was not just a tool. It was a step toward becoming the figure that could strike fear into Gotham's underworld. By choosing the bat as his symbol, he embraced what frightened him most as a child and weaponized it against those who preyed on others. Batman became the ultimate form of Bruce's coping mechanism. Not healing, but control. This kind of response reflects what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, where individuals rise from loss with extraordinary focus and resilience. But in Bruce's case, it came at a cost. Instead of balancing growth with acceptance, he leaned entirely into obsession. Every aspect of his life became organized around the mission. He rejected ordinary pleasures, distanced himself from relationships, and sacrificed the possibility of peace. Pain had become so central to his identity that letting it go would erase the foundation he built. The creation of Batman illustrates how many vigilantes channel suffering into purpose. They see injustice not as an abstract concept, but as something personal. For Bruce, crime is not statistics or policy. It is the force that destroyed his family. By fighting it, he is fighting the memory of that night, again and again. And yet, this constant battle does not bring closure. It reinforces the wound, reminding him of what he lost while also fueling his determination. Turning pain into purpose gave Bruce Wayne the strength to become Batman, but it also locked him in a cycle he cannot escape. Each victory over Gotham's criminals feels like a step forward, yet every crime reminds him of his parents' absence. Becoming Batman gave Bruce Wayne a sense of control, but it also created a heavy psychological burden. Living as a vigilante means carrying a responsibility that never ends. There are no shifts, no retirements, no off days. Crime in Gotham never stops, which means Batman never feels permitted to stop either. This relentless mission places him in a state of constant tension. In psychology, this is similar to what researchers call hypervigilance. People who have experienced trauma often remain on high alert, scanning for threats, even when none are present. For Batman, this state becomes his normal way of living. He is always prepared for danger, always waiting for the next crisis. While this mindset makes him an effective crime fighter, it comes at a cost. Rest becomes difficult. Relationships become strained. Joy is nearly impossible because his mind is trained to focus only on risk. The burden also extends to morality. Unlike law enforcement officers who act under the authority of the state, Batman operates entirely outside the system. Every action is a choice he makes without formal oversight. This autonomy forces him to carry the weight of each decision alone. If a mission succeeds, Gotham may sleep a little safer. But if it fails, Batman bears the guilt personally. That guilt compounds the grief he already carries from childhood, reinforcing the idea that he must always do more. Isolation deepens the burden further. Bruce Wayne cannot openly share his struggles, because exposing the truth would destroy the symbol he created. Friends and allies like Alfred, Gordon, or the Bat family ease the weight at times. But even with them, Bruce often withholds the full depth of his pain. He views suffering as part of his duty, convincing himself that to admit weakness would undermine the mission. This self-imposed isolation is common among vigilantes, both fictional and real, who see their role as larger than themselves. The cost of this burden is evident in Batman's inability to live as Bruce Wayne. The persona of the billionaire playboy is a mask he wears for the public, not a true self. The real man exists only in the shadows. This split identity, while useful in strategy, leaves him unmoored. Without the mission, he has little sense of who he is. That identity crisis makes rest or retirement feel impossible. The vigilante's burden is more than the fight against crime. It is the cycle of responsibility, guilt, and self-denial that often grows out of trauma and mistrust in the systems meant to deliver justice. Batman embodies this cycle perfectly. He is driven, disciplined, and powerful. Yet he is also exhausted, haunted, and trapped. His greatest victories never lift the burden fully because new crimes always appear. Most people who experience trauma eventually search for closure, whether through therapy, relationships, or the passage of time. Bruce Wayne does the opposite. He clings to his pain, nurturing it until it defines him. This refusal to move on transforms what could have been recovery into lifelong obsession. From a psychological standpoint, obsession often arises when unresolved trauma collides with an intense need for control. For Bruce, the world stopped making sense the night his parents were murdered. He responded by devoting every resource to preventing that tragedy from happening to anyone else. The vow he made as a child became a cycle he cannot escape. Each crime he stops feels like a step toward redemption, yet it never fills the emptiness left by his loss. Instead, it deepens the compulsion to continue. There are many moments in the comics and films where Bruce is offered the chance at healing. Characters like Alfred, Selina Kyle, or even Dick Grayson remind him that a life outside the mission is possible. Yet he always resists. Letting go of Batman would mean accepting that his parents' deaths cannot be undone, and that his own suffering has no larger purpose. That is something Bruce cannot allow himself to face. His obsession protects him from the unbearable truth, but it also keeps him locked in grief. Comparing Batman to other vigilantes highlights this tension even more clearly. The Punisher, for example, channels his loss into pure vengeance, burning through criminals without concern for morality or restraint. Daredevil struggles between his faith and his rage, often stepping back from vigilantism before being pulled back in. Unlike them, Batman walks a line where obsession and morality intersect. He refuses to kill, clinging to a moral code that prevents him from becoming the very thing he despises. Yet that code does not free him. It keeps him bound to an endless war, a cycle that brings no resolution. Closure, in psychological terms, requires acceptance. It means recognizing that the past cannot change and allowing the self to move forward. For Bruce, moving forward feels like betrayal. He believes his parents' memory demands more than peace. It demands sacrifice. This mindset explains why Batman is often depicted as unable to retire, even when Gotham appears safe. His identity is too entwined with the mission to survive without it. The obsession that drives Batman is what makes him effective. It explains his discipline, his fearlessness, and his endurance. But it is also what ensures he will never escape his past. He cannot allow himself to stop because stopping would mean facing the pain he has spent his life running from. Batman's inability to let go of pain does not just define him as a character. It also explains why he resonates so deeply with audiences across generations. People are drawn to his story because it reflects a struggle that is both personal and cultural. How do we live with wounds that never truly heal? Unlike heroes who are larger than life, Batman feels human in his flaws. His trauma, obsession, and isolation mirror struggles that many recognize, even if in less extreme forms. Viewers and readers see in him the persistence of grief, the weight of guilt, and the desire to turn suffering into something meaningful. In this way, Batman becomes a symbol not of perfection, but of endurance. He embodies the part of us that cannot always move on, yet still finds a way to keep fighting. Culturally, the figure of the vigilante has always carried weight. From ancient tales of outlaws to modern urban legends, societies have been fascinated by individuals who step outside the system to deliver justice. These figures emerge most strongly in times when people lose faith in institutions. Gotham, with its corrupt politicians and unreliable police, reflects that anxiety. Batman thrives in such a world because he is the answer to a question many fear to ask. What happens when the system cannot protect us? The appeal of Batman lies in the paradox he represents. On one hand, he is a source of hope for Gotham's citizens, proof that someone will stand against corruption and crime. On the other, he is a reminder of the cost of such a mission. His pain is never resolved, his personal happiness always sacrificed. This duality fascinates audiences because it captures the tension between justice and personal well-being. We admire his strength, yet we also recognize the tragedy of his endless war. Psychologists often note that stories like Batman's serve as cultural mirrors. They allow societies to explore fears and desires through fictional figures. The enduring popularity of Batman suggests that many people see value in the idea of turning pain into action, even at great cost. His story reflects the belief that suffering does not have to mean defeat. It can be reshaped into purpose. At the same time, it warns of the danger in letting obsession consume identity. By clinging to pain, Batman becomes timeless. He never heals, and because of that, his story never ends. For audiences, this creates both comfort and unease. Comfort, because it assures us that justice is always being pursued. Unease, because it forces us to ask whether true healing is ever possible for someone whose life has already been centered around trauma. In the end, Batman represents both sides of trauma's legacy. Pain can forge strength, but it can also become a prison. That tension is what makes him endure as a cultural icon. He is not simply Gotham's protector. He is the embodiment of how grief can shape identity, for better and for worse, and that is why Batman cannot let go. Because to let go would mean losing Batman himself. If you found this breakdown meaningful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Join us as we continue to explore the hidden psychology and meanings behind the characters and shows we know and love. Thanks for watching. See you next time.